Barbara Bancroft, matriarch of the sprawling Bancroft Industries, lay in the sterile confines of a private hospital room, the scent of antiseptic a cruel mockery of her gilded life. Her gaze, usually sharp enough to dissect a faulty balance sheet from 50 paces, was fixed on the acoustic tiles of the ceiling. Thoughts, tangled and sharp as barbed wire, ensnared her. Had she truly dedicated her life, her very soul, to building an empire for them, her children, only for them to plot her demise for a quicker inheritance? A single hot tear escaped, tracing a bitter path down her weathered cheek, followed swiftly by another. "Mrs. Bancroft? Are you crying?" A gentle voice intruded. Barbara turned, her neck stiff, to see a young nurse, Cindy, her kind face framed by soft blonde curls, eyes wide with genuine concern. "It's nothing, dear," Barbara rasped, her voice hoarse from disuse and unshed tears, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. "Just an old woman's sentimentality. Don't you mind me." Cindy, however, wasn't easily fooled. She drew closer, perching on the edge of the visitor's chair. "How are you really feeling today, Mrs. Bancroft?" she pressed, her gaze unwavering. "Better," Barbara breathed, the word a lie. "A little better." Cindy hesitated, then, "Has anyone been by to see you?" Her eyes flickered away for a moment, as if weighing her words. "Your grandson, Eric, he was here." She paused, chewing her lip. "Go on, child," Barbara urged, a grim smile touching her lips. "At my age, I've learned sparing feelings is a fool's errand. Life has a way of toughening one up." Cindy took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bancroft, it's not my place, but I overheard him. He only seemed interested in your money." Barbara's laugh was a dry, bitter sound. "They all are, dear. Money. I built Bancroft Industries for them, and now they see me as nothing more than a walking, talking ATM. "It's not fair," Cindy whispered, her brow furrowed. Barbara looked at the young nurse with a flicker of unexpected warmth. "Fair? What in this God-forsaken world is fair, child? You're young, idealistic. Time will teach you." "You say that like you've given up," Cindy countered. "But what if they had something to do with you being in here?" The words hung in the air, electric and terrifying. Barbara froze, her body tensing. Her eyes, old and tired, slowly narrowed into dangerous slits. "What exactly are you implying, Cindy?" she asked, her voice a low growl as she struggled to sit up, propping herself against the pillows. Cindy leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I heard your grandson Eric on the phone. He was saying something like, 'If the cops come sniffing around here, they might dig up the truth.'" The color drained from Barbara Bancroft's face, leaving it a mask of dawning horror. A tremor ran through her. They really would, wouldn't they?" she murmured, more to herself than to the nurse. "You seem so calm about it," Cindy said, her own voice laced with disbelief. "Why haven't you called the police?" Barbara's sigh was heavy with a lifetime of disappointment. "Because, my dear, it wouldn't change a thing. Money, it's a curse. They'd tear each other apart for it. And me? I'm just an obstacle in their path." Cindy looked aghast. "But that's monstrous." "Monstrous," Barbara repeated, a bitter smile playing on her lips. "Oh, you have no idea what people are capable of, child. Especially the ones you love, the ones you'd once have died for." "So what will you do?" Cindy asked, her brow furrowed with concern and a touch of fear. Barbara turned her gaze to the window, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured hospital lawns. For a long moment, she was silent. Then a steely resolve hardened her features. "They won't see a dime," she declared, her voice suddenly firm. "Not one red cent. It's the only way to punish them, to make them understand." Cindy rose, a conflicted expression on her face. If you need anything, Mrs. Bancroft, anything at all, just press the call button." She gave Barbara's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Thank you, dear," Barbara said, a genuine warmth in her tone for the first time. "But I've been fighting my own battles for a very long time." As Cindy quietly exited, the silence of the room descended upon Barbara like a shroud. She was alone again, adrift in a sea of betrayal. Her eyes scanned the sterile room, landing on the nightstand. An old, leather-bound family album lay there. With a trembling hand, she reached for it, her fingers tracing the worn cover. Opening it to the first page, a photograph of her late husband, Arthur, smiled back at her, a kind, loving man. "Oh, Arthur," she whispered, "where did I go so wrong?" Each turn of the page was a stab to the heart. Her daughter Monica's first steps, her son Edward's Little League trophy, a family picnic at the lake house in the Hamptons, a time when they were still a unit, bound by love, not avarice. Then the final page, a recent photo of Eric, her grandson. His eyes, cold and calculating, stared back at her, mirroring the look he'd given her just days before. "If the cops come sniffing around," Cindy's words echoed. Barbara's grip tightened on the album. "If this is their game," she muttered, her voice regaining its old iron, "I refuse to let them win." A sharp rap on the door, followed by its immediate opening, announced the arrival of Hugh Hatfield, his silver hair impeccably styled, his suit Savile Row. He was Barbara's oldest friend, her confidant, and most importantly, her personal attorney. "Barbara, my dear, you look surprisingly well considering," he boomed, a playful lift to his eyebrow. "Oh, Hugh, you old charmer," she chuckled, extending a frail hand. "Still can't resist an opportunity, can you?" "Never, when it involves a beautiful woman," he replied with a grin, settling into the armchair beside her bed. "Such a flatterer," Barbara smirked. "All right, cut the preamble. Why are you really here?" Hugh's smile faded, his expression turning serious. "I was worried about you, Barbara. Truly. Tell me what's happened. The real story." Barbara leaned back against the pillows, her face hardening into grim lines. "It seems, my dear Hugh, that my darling relatives have decided it's time to expedite my departure from this world to get their greedy hands on my estate." She delivered the line with chilling calm, yet a tremor of bitterness laced her voice. Hatfield frowned, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. "Do you have actual grounds for such a suspicion, Barbara?" "Grounds?" She gave a short, sharp laugh. "Hugh, I have a veritable mountain of grounds. I may be old, but I'm not blind, or deaf. And you, Hugh? Are you surprised?" Her gaze was piercing. "Frankly, yes," he admitted, sighing as he removed his spectacles and polished them with a silk handkerchief. "I'd always hoped your children were raised with better principles." "Principles?" Barbara scoffed. "Their only principle is the almighty dollar. And whose fault is that, I wonder? Mine, I suppose. I gave them too much, demanded too little." "So what have you decided?" Hatfield leaned forward, his lawyerly instincts kicking in, sensing a significant development. A ghost of a smile, devoid of warmth, touched Barbara's lips. "They'll get nothing. Absolutely nothing." "A bold declaration," he observed, pulling a sleek, leather-bound notepad and a Mont Blanc pen from his jacket. "I take it you have a plan?" "I do indeed," she confirmed, her eyes glinting. "And I need your help to draft the documents, Hugh. Immediately. That's what I'm here for. Proceed." Hatfield poised his pen. "Firstly," Barbara began, her voice gaining strength, "I want to rewrite the company, Bancroft Industries, lock, stock, and barrel, over to Alice." "Alice?" Hatfield raised an eyebrow in surprise. "My late husband Arthur's daughter from his first marriage," Barbara clarified with a nod. "She lives in London, a smart, capable woman. Never asked me for a thing, though Lord knows she could have. And she has a keen business mind, unlike my offspring." "Are you absolutely certain about this, Barbara?" he queried. "More certain than I've been about anything in years," she stated firmly. "Alice has integrity. She has principles, something my own children seem to have misplaced, if they ever possessed them. Enough about them." Hatfield jotted down a few quick notes. "And the rest of your estate? Your personal assets, properties?" he asked cautiously. "Simple," Barbara said, a strange serenity settling over her. "Upon my death, I want everything liquidated. Every stock, every bond, every piece of art, every square foot of real estate. And the entire proceeds are to be transferred to the children's home where I grew up, St. Catherine's." Hugh Hatfield slowly shook his head, a faint, almost admiring smile playing on his lips. Barbara, You always were unpredictable." "This isn't an impulse, Hugh," she said, her tone unwavering. "I've given this a great deal of thought. More than you know." "Are you sure this is right?" he asked gently, his lawyerly caution giving way to friendly concern. "Right or wrong, it's what I want," she stated, her voice cutting through the air with finality. A heavy silence settled between them, punctuated only by the distant muted hum of hospital life. "Very well," Hatfield said at last, his professionalism reasserting itself. "I'll prepare all the necessary paperwork as quickly as possible. We can have it signed within days." "Thank you, Hugh. You've always been a rock." "Just get better, Barbara," he said, rising. "I'll see you in a couple of days with the documents ready for your signature." After Hugh departed, Barbara felt a sliver of clarity pierce the whirlwind of her thoughts. "Not a penny," she vowed, her gaze drifting to the window, where a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of a maple tree. "They won't get a single blood-soaked penny." A grim satisfaction settled in her heart. She had a plan, and Barbara Bancroft's plans always came to fruition. Meanwhile, across town, the opulent Bancroft mansion, with its soaring ceilings and imposing Doric columns, thrummed with a tense, unholy energy. In the cavernous living room, Barbara's 3 children, Edward, Monica, and Brett, were gathered. Crystal tumblers of expensive scotch sat on the antique coffee table, but no one looked remotely relaxed. Edward, the youngest, lounged in a leather armchair, a picture of feigned nonchalance, but the nervous tick in his left eye betrayed his anxiety. "So," he drawled, swirling his whiskey, "has anyone actually seen this mythical new will?" Monica, the eldest, ever elegant but with lips pursed into a prune of disapproval, shot him a withering glare. "No, but I saw Hatfield slinking into Mother's office about a month ago," she said, rolling her eyes dramatically. "I bet she was plotting something even then, that conniving old—" Brett, the middle child, perpetually anxious and always preferring the shadows, poured himself another generous measure of scotch and downed it in one gulp. "For God's sake," he muttered, "Mom's completely lost it. She's gone senile." "You think?" Edward snorted, shifting in his chair. "Is it just me? Or does it feel like she's about to screw us, her own flesh and blood out of everything?" Monica stalked to the grand window, twitching the heavy velvet curtain aside. "It's entirely possible," she mused, her reflection staring back, cold and hard. "She always prattled on about us continuing her legacy. Maybe we should try to crack open that damn safe in her study. I'm sure all the important papers are in there." Edward let out a humorless laugh. "Brilliant, Monica! And how do you propose we do that? Are we suddenly a team of cat burglars from a bad heist movie? Could you, for once in your life, stop being utterly useless and contribute something constructive?" she snapped. Hey, Brett interjected, attempting to mediate. "Let's just think this through calmly, okay?" Just then, Monica's cell phone shrilled. She glanced at the caller ID, and her face froze. "It's Mother," she whispered, then held up a hand to silence her brothers as she switched the call to speakerphone. "Yes, Mom?" Her voice was deceptively calm, but the tension in her eyes was palpable. "Barbara, my darlings," came the cool, amplified voice of Mrs. Bancroft from the phone. "I trust you're all gathered, eagerly dissecting the potential spoils of my impending demise." Edward choked on his whiskey, while Brett, reaching for another drink, froze mid-motion as Monica shot him a venomous look. "Mom, you're imagining things," Monica replied, a note of strained exasperation in her voice. "Why would we be doing that?" A low, dry chuckle crackled from the other end. "Oh, my sweet, avaricious children, I know you far too well. You're like sharks circling a wounded whale, aren't you? Just waiting for the kill, ready to rip your share from the carcass?" Monica rolled her eyes, but before she could retort, her mother continued. "There's just one small hiccup in your grand plans." A cough, sharp and deliberate, echoed through the speaker. "What are you talking about, Mother?" Monica demanded, her voice sharpening with suspicion. "You're getting nothing," Mrs. Bancroft stated flatly, followed by a brittle laugh and the decisive click of the line disconnecting. A stunned silence descended upon the opulent living room. "What did she say?" Edward was the first to break the silence, leaping from his chair. "Nothing? We get nothing? She's got to be bluffing. I told you Mom's gone completely off her rocker, Brett exploded, pacing the expensive Persian rug. Maybe we should have her committed, for her own good, Edward suggested with a sneer. And what good would that do? Brett countered, clearly rattled. If she's already changed the will, we're powerless. Monica's eyes narrowed, her face a mask of intense concentration. No, we don't know anything for sure yet. Hatfield was with her. We need to find out what he was doing there. And how do you propose we do that, genius? Brett scoffed. You think he's just going to spill her secrets to us? We'll find a way, Monica asserted, her voice like ice. For now, I think it's best we all go home and cool off. Cool off? Edward waved his hands in exasperation. We have a 5-alarm fire on our hands, and you're suggesting a siesta? We need to think clearly, Edward, not make rash decisions, Monica said, grabbing her designer handbag. I'm not about to panic. She swept towards the door. Fine, Brett muttered. But we need to be careful, very careful. Monica paused at the doorway, looking back at her brothers. We'll talk tomorrow. Edward and Brett remained in the living room, exchanging uneasy glances. The prospect of their mother's disinheritance had only amplified their already simmering resentments. Soon, they too departed, each to their separate enclaves of luxury, their minds racing. Later that night, under the cloak of a moonless sky, Eric Bancroft, Brett's son, pulled his gleaming sports car into the quiet, dimly lit parking lot of the private hospital. The chrome detailing winked ostentatiously. He cut the engine and waited as a man in a severe suit, clutching a briefcase, emerged from the passenger side. Mr. Grant, Eric's personal notary. Are you certain this will work, Mr. Bancroft? Grant inquired, peering at Eric over his thin-rimmed glasses. Positive, Eric replied coolly, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke shirt. I have a foolproof plan. They strode into the hospital, heading for the night nurse's station. A young woman, Cindy, looked up from her computer, her face etched with fatigue, surprise flickering in her eyes at the late-night visitors. Excuse me, gentlemen, but visiting hours ended hours ago, she stated, polite but firm. Eric stepped closer, a disarming yet predatory smile spreading across his handsome face. Perhaps for us, you could make a small exception, he purred, smoothly extracting a thick wad of bills from his jacket pocket and extending it towards her. Cindy froze, her eyes darting from the cash to the empty hallway, then back to Eric. A moment of internal conflict, then she subtly pocketed the money. This way, she whispered, beckoning them to follow. Down a long, echoing corridor they went, their footsteps unnaturally loud in the stillness, until they reached Mrs. Bancroft's room. 5 minutes, Cindy warned. And please, try to be quiet. Eric pushed open the door. The room was dimly lit. Mrs. Bancroft, pale but with an undeniable air of command still clinging to her, lay in the bed. Grandma! Eric exclaimed, his smile wide and utterly false. How are you feeling? The old woman turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowed. You won't get away with it, she rasped. Or do you think I don't know it was you? You tried to poison me, you wretched boy. Eric's charming facade faltered for a split second, a flicker of panic in his eyes before he quickly composed himself. Grandma, who's been filling your head with such nonsense? He asked, his voice attempting a soothing tone that didn't quite ring true. I know plenty, Eric, Barbara Bancroft countered, her gaze sharp and accusing. You think your dirty little games will go unpunished? You think I'm some doddering old fool? Mr. Grant, the notary, stood silently behind Eric, his face a stoic, unreadable mask. Grandma, I'm here to support you, to make sure you're comfortable, Eric began, trying to project sincerity. Barbara let out a short, harsh laugh that quickly turned into a racking cough. Support me! Get out! She wheezed, her voice rising. Get out and never come back! The monitors beside her bed began to beep erratically. Grandma, please don't excite yourself, Eric said, taking an involuntary step back as her agitation grew. Out! She shrieked. The beeping intensified, a shrill alarm cutting through the room. The door burst open, and Cindy, the night nurse, rushed in, followed by a stern-faced doctor. "What is going on here? How did you get in?" the doctor demanded, his eyes fixing on Eric. This is just a misunderstanding," Eric stammered, struggling to maintain his composure. "Leave this room, immediately," Cindy ordered, ushering a flustered Eric and a silent Mr. Grant out into the hallway. Inside the room, the doctor was already by Barbara's side. 10 milligrams of diazepam IV, stat, he commanded the nurse. "You'll feel better in a moment, Mrs. Bancroft," Cindy said gently, administering the injection. Barbara's breathing was ragged, but gradually, as the sedative took effect, her agitation subsided, and she drifted into a deep, exhausted sleep. Eric and Mr. Grant made a hasty retreat via a back exit, eager to avoid further attention. Once in the car, the notary turned to Eric, his expression cool. "Well, that was unsuccessful. What's your next move?" Eric let out a short, mirthless laugh, but a determined glint shone in his eyes. "Now? Now we move to Plan B. Grandma's left us no choice." "I would advise extreme caution, Mr. Bancroft," Grant warned, his tone glacial. Eric merely nodded, his mind already racing, plotting his next desperate maneuver. The drive to his parents' house was a blur of anger and frustration. The weak glow of streetlights illuminated the driveway of Brett Bancroft's suburban McMansion. Eric slammed the car door and stormed towards the house, his heart pounding, thoughts like caged animals. He'd been so close, so sure his scheme would work. He burst into the kitchen, drawn by the low murmur of voices. His parents, Brett and Emma, were seated at the kitchen island, a half-empty bottle of expensive bourbon between them, along with several glasses and a plate of picked-over hors d'oeuvres. "Eric?" Emma said, surprised by his sudden, agitated entrance. "Where have you been, honey?" Ignoring her, Eric ran his hands through his hair, his face contorted. "Dad? Grandma knows. She knows I tried to poison her." Brett, who had been slowly swirling his bourbon, froze. He carefully placed the glass on the granite countertop, his knuckles white. "What?" Emma gasped, her face instantly paling. She confronted me at the hospital," Eric stammered, pacing the kitchen, avoiding his mother's horrified gaze. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Didn't mean for it to go this far?" Emma shrieked, rising from her stool, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "You tried to kill your own grandmother, Eric?" "No," he yelled, backing away. I just wanted to make her a little weaker, you know? So she'd lose her grip, so we could persuade her to change the will back in our favor." "Persuade her?" Brett finally spoke, his voice a low, dangerous growl, as he, too, stood. His eyes, usually filled with a weary anxiety, now glinted with a cold, unfamiliar rage. "Why, Eric? Why would you do something so monumentally stupid?" Eric stammered. I thought, if she was, not herself, we could make her sign things. For us, for the family." "You goddamn idiot!" Brett roared, slamming his fist on the counter, his voice echoing off the designer tiles. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The kind of trouble you could be in? We could all be in." "Dad, Eric began, but Emma cut him off. "Didn't you even consider," she asked, her voice cracking, "that you might actually kill her? Your own flesh and blood?" "She hates us anyway," Eric cried out, defiant. "She was never going to leave us anything. She said so." "That's no excuse," Emma retorted, her face ashen. "You had no right to play God, to decide for all of us." Brett poured himself another large bourbon and tossed it back before slumping back onto his stool. He leaned forward, elbows on the counter, and fixed his son with a long, hard stare. "Listen to me very carefully, Eric," he said slowly, struggling for control. "You will never, ever meddle in this again. Do you understand me?" "But Dad, do you understand me?" Brett bellowed, his fist hitting the island again, rattling the glasses. Eric flinched, then nodded mutely. I understand," he whispered. Emma, still standing, covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, Brett," she sobbed, then lowered her hands, looking at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. "What are we going to do now? If Barbara tells someone—" "She won't," Brett interrupted sharply. "She's too proud to air the family's dirty laundry in public. But we need to be exceptionally careful from now on." Emma nodded, though her face remained a mask of distress. She went to Eric, placing her hands on his trembling shoulders. Eric, you have to understand. Things like this, they can destroy our entire family. This isn't some game. I get it, Mom, he mumbled, looking away, shame and resentment warring within him. Brett refilled his glass, this time sipping slowly, his mind a whirlwind. Tomorrow, he announced, staring into the amber liquid. I'm going to see Mother myself. I'll try to smooth things over. You think she'll even see you? Emma asked tentatively. I don't know, Brett admitted, his voice flat. But we don't have a choice, do we? Eric slowly backed out of the kitchen, leaving his parents to their strained silence. He retreated to his room, throwing himself onto the bed. One thought hammered in his brain. I was so close. In the kitchen, Brett and Emma's hushed, anxious conversation continued. Are you sure you can convince her? Emma pressed, handing her husband a clean glass. No, Brett confessed, pouring another drink. Honestly, no, but we can't just sit here and do nothing. If she finds out we knew about Eric's stunt, her voice trailed off. She won't find out, Brett said firmly. The main thing is that idiot son of ours doesn't do anything else to make it worse. You're too hard on him, Emma sighed. Hard? Brett scoffed. Emma, do you realize he nearly ruined us all? Emma fell silent. Brett stared at the glass in his hand, the reflection of the kitchen lights glinting off its surface. How had everything spiraled so completely out of control? Tomorrow, he said finally, his voice cold. Everything changes. One thing I know for sure. I won't let that boy or anyone jeopardize this family's future. A heavy silence filled the room. Emma watched her husband, her eyes filled with a deep unease. I hope you know what you're doing, Brett, she whispered. He didn't answer, just nodded grimly and reached for the bourbon bottle again. The next morning, through the grimy windshield of his sedan, Brett stared at the imposing gray facade of the hospital. A knot of dread tightened in his chest. His last conversation with his mother months ago had ended in a volley of accusations and a slammed door. He killed the engine, closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep, fortifying breath, then stepped out into the cool morning air. Brett's strides across the hospital parking lot were quick, but an undercurrent of nervous tension radiated from every movement. He had to fix this, or at least try. Inside, the hospital buzzed with its usual organized chaos. Nurses hurried along corridors, patients waited on benches. A visitor argued quietly with a receptionist. Brett approached the information desk with a show of confidence. I'm here to see Mrs. Barbara Bancroft, he stated curtly. The nurse on duty looked up, her expression immediately wary. And you are? Her son, Brett Bancroft. She's resting after a difficult night, Mr. Bancroft. She really shouldn't have any upsetting visitors, the nurse said, her tone bordering on accusatory. I won't stay long, Brett assured her. I just need to make sure she's okay. The nurse hesitated, then, with a sigh, gestured towards the elevators. Third floor, room 312. Brett thanked her and headed for the lift, his palms sweating as the car ascended. He paused outside his mother's room, steeling himself, then pushed the door open. Barbara Bancroft lay in bed, her face gaunt and pale, dark circles etched under her eyes. Yet despite her frailty, that familiar, indomitable glint in her eyes, the one that had always intimidated and, perversely, fascinated Brett, remained. Why are you here? She asked, her voice cold, devoid of any greeting. Brett froze momentarily, then quickly regained his composure. I wanted to talk to you, Mom, he said, approaching the bed. She squinted, her lips tightening into a thin, uncompromising line. Talk? After everything that's happened? I know you're angry, he began, trying to keep his voice calm. And you have every right to be. I have a right to a great many things, Brett, she cut him off sharply. The least of which is to not have you darkening my doorway. He sank onto the visitor's chair, attempting to meet her steely gaze. Mom, I came to explain. Explain what? She scoffed. That your son is a vile, underhanded degenerate who tried to poison me for my money? Brett lowered his head. He made a terrible mistake, he said quietly. He didn't mean, are you serious? Her voice rose, but she immediately broke into a fit of coughing. Brett reached for the nurse's call button. "Don't bother," she rasped, waving him off once she'd caught her breath. "I can manage." "Mom, I didn't come here to make excuses for Eric," Brett said, his voice earnest. "I came to ask for your forgiveness." She looked at him, her expression one of profound disbelief. "Forgiveness?" she repeated. "You actually think I'd believe a single word of your supposed remorse?" "It's not about whether you believe it," he replied, looking her straight in the eye. "It's because I genuinely am sorry. For everything." "How amusing," she said, her laugh dry and bitter. "Sorry your despicable little family couldn't finish the job, perhaps?" Brett flinched as if struck. "I know you see us as enemies, Mom, but it's not true." "Isn't it?" she interjected. "Then why am I lying here in this sterile prison instead of enjoying my own home, my own life?" "Because we made mistakes," he conceded. "Horrible mistakes." Barbara was silent, her face unreadable. The quiet in the room was heavy, pressing down on Brett. "I want to fix this, Mom," he pleaded. "Give me a chance." "You really think," she said, a faint, mocking smile on her lips, "that what's been done can simply be undone?" "I can try," he offered. She turned away, her gaze wandering over the blank white ceiling. "You always were the weak one, Brett," she said finally, her voice weary. "Even now, you're not here for me. You're here for yourself, for what you stand to lose." He remained silent, knowing any argument was futile. "Leave, Brett," she said, her voice tired. "I'm too old for these family psychodramas." Brett stood, his heart constricting with a familiar ache of inadequacy and sorrow. "If you change your mind," he began. "I won't," she cut him off. He nodded, retreating towards the door. "Take care of yourself, Mom," he said softly before slipping out. In the hallway, he leaned against the cool wall, a maelstrom of anger, frustration, and helplessness churning within him. "Mr. Bancroft?" He looked up to see a different nurse, offering a tentative smile. "Are you all right?" "Yes," he lied, pulling himself together. "Just a little tired." He walked towards the elevator, each step heavy with the weight of his failure. The grand Bancroft estate stood as a monument to Barbara's unyielding will, its manicured gardens and classical statues forming an imposing fortress. A few days later, Barbara Bancroft herself appeared on the doorstep, leaning lightly on Hugh Hatfield's arm. Despite her recent ordeal, her eyes blazed with their former resolve, a sarcastic smirk playing on her lips. "Well, my darlings," she announced, sweeping into the grand foyer, "I'm home." Hatfield helped her to the living room sofa. Monica, Brett, and Edward, caught completely off guard, sat rigidly, like misbehaving schoolchildren summoned to the principal's office. "I always said predators flock together," Barbara purred, settling in. "So what vital family matters were you discussing in my house?" Monica was the first to break the awkward, charged silence that had descended upon the living room. "Mother, we were so worried. You didn't call," she gushed, rushing to Barbara's side, her voice dripping with feigned concern, though a nervous tremor was evident. Barbara merely smirked. "Worried? So worried, in fact, that not a single one of you bothered to visit me in that dreadful hospital?" She waved a dismissive hand, her tone a sharp, mocking blade. "The silence in here is deafening." Brett stared at the expensive Aubusson carpet. Edward tensed visibly, and Monica swallowed hard, a flush creeping up her neck. We were just," Monica began, but Brett cut her off. "Mom, you know how busy we've been," he said quickly, finally looking up. "Busy?" Barbara arched an eyebrow, her surprise theatrically exaggerated. "Busy with what, pray tell? What could possibly be more important than your dear mother, lying on what could have been her deathbed?" Edward, summoning a sliver of courage, finally spoke. "Mom, let's not make a scene. The important thing is, you're home now, and you're safe." "Safe?" Barbara let out a brittle laugh. "I hardly feel safe in my own home, surrounded by a pack of circling sharks. Do you think I'm a fool? Do you think I don't know why you're really here, hovering like vultures?" Hugh Hatfield, who had been standing discreetly in the corner, chuckled softly and leaned towards Barbara. "Madam, if you'll excuse me, I believe I'll take my leave. I wouldn't want to intrude on this heartfelt family reunion," he said, taking her hand and brushing his lips against her knuckles. "Until next time, Hugh," she replied with a slight nod. Once he'd departed, the oppressive silence returned. "Well?" Barbara broke it, her gaze sweeping over each of her children. "Who wants to confess first?" Monica attempted a smile. It was a strained, unconvincing grimace. "We just wanted to make sure you were all right, Mother." "Yes, yes, of course," Barbara snorted. "Especially after I nearly kicked the bucket, eh?" Brett sighed, and looking up, decided to try a different, more conciliatory approach. "Mom, you know we love you. We were genuinely worried about you, but we didn't want to crowd you." "Love?" She chuckled mirthlessly. "Is your love measured in prolonged silence, then? Or perhaps in a fervent desire to see me 6 feet under?" The words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Brett nearly jumped from his seat, but managed to restrain himself. "What are you trying to say, Mother?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "You know perfectly well what I'm saying," she retorted, her voice turning to ice. Monica whirled on Brett, hissing under her breath. "This is all your fault." "My fault?" Brett threw his hands up. "You were the one who first suggested—" "Silence, both of you!" Barbara snapped, rising from the sofa with a visible effort that nonetheless radiated authority. "Do you think I'm oblivious? Do you imagine I don't know that each of you would sell your miserable souls for a piece of my inheritance?" Her voice trembled with a potent cocktail of rage and betrayal. "Do you take me for a complete imbecile?" Edward, who had remained stoically silent, finally stood. "Mother, no one wishes you any harm," he said, his tone firm. "We just want you to know you can count on us. You want me to believe in this sudden, overwhelming flood of filial devotion?" She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the cavernous room. Edward shook his head. "We can argue all day, Mother, but it won't change a thing." "You're right," she conceded, sinking back onto the sofa. "It won't change a thing, which is why I've taken matters into my own hands." What have you decided?" Monica asked, her voice laced with a sudden sharp anxiety. "Regarding my will," Barbara began, her voice low and detached as if addressing strangers, "none of you are in it, and that includes your children. Not a single one of you will inherit so much as a rusty nail." The pronouncement struck them like a physical blow. Brett's face went slack, his eyes empty with disbelief. "Why?" he whispered, as if he couldn't comprehend the words. Monica, though visibly shaken, managed to rally, her face contorted with pain and utter bewilderment. "Then who did you leave it to?" Her tone was a desperate plea for an answer she already dreaded. Mrs. Bancroft's gaze swept over them, cold and unwavering. "I had intended to leave it all to St. Catherine's, the children's home that took me in when I had nothing. But you," she spat the word with contempt, "you've shown me you're not worthy of a single cent I've worked my entire life to accumulate." Silence, thick and suffocating, filled the room. Monica's fists clenched, and Brett leaned forward, his face a mask of fury. "What kind of mother are you?" he exploded. "You've spent our whole lives lecturing us, pushing us to marry well, to produce heirs for the family business. And now this?" Monica's eyes welled with tears. "Are you completely insane?" Barbara stared back, her expression unyielding. "Now I know what we'll do," Edward said, his voice quiet but chillingly resolute. He glanced at his siblings. They nodded in grim, silent accord. "We're going to take Mommy for a little drive. A nice trip to the woods. Give her a day or two to reconsider her hasty decisions. When we pick her up, I'm sure she'll be much more agreeable about signing a new will." His voice was so laden with malice that the very air seemed to crackle. "Are you out of your mind?" Brett hissed, but Edward was already moving, grabbing a coil of rope from a nearby utility closet. Monica stared at her mother, at her tired, drawn face. For a horrifying instant, she saw not her mother, but an obstacle. The thought vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a sickening dread. "Edward, are you serious?" she whispered, but it was too late. They dragged the struggling, protesting Barbara out to the car and drove deep into the secluded woods. There, with a brutal efficiency that defied belief, they tied the once powerful matriarch to a thick oak tree. Barbara felt her eyelids grow heavy, each movement of her children a fresh stab of betrayal, sapping her strength. She closed her eyes, terror a cold knot in her stomach. As the car disappeared down the dirt track, leaving her alone and helpless, a wave of despair washed over her. Then, through the haze of fear, she heard it. A child's voice, clear and sweet. "Lady? Lady, are you okay?" It was so unexpected, so surreal, that Barbara almost thought she was hallucinating. The voice, though distant, was a lifeline. "Honey," Barbara rasped, her body screaming in protest. "Get help. Please, find an adult. Don't die!" the little girl cried, her voice receding as she ran off into the trees. Barbara clung to that tiny thread of hope. Time stretched into an agonizing eternity for Barbara Bancroft, tied to the unforgiving oak. Each rustle of leaves, each snap of a twig, sent a fresh jolt of fear through her. Was it her children returning, their cruel plan evolving? Or perhaps something far worse lurking in the deepening shadows of the woods? Just as despair threatened to consume her entirely, she heard voices again. Adult voices this time, and the lighter tones of the little girl. "She's over here! I told you!" A woman, her face etched with concern, hurried towards Barbara, followed by a man and the small girl. "Ma'am? Oh my goodness! Are you all right?" The woman knelt beside her, her voice a balm of genuine alarm. Barbara tried to speak, but her throat was parched, her lips cracked. Only a weak nod conveyed her desperate state. The man and woman began to gently, carefully untie the ropes. The process was excruciatingly slow, each loosened knot a fresh wave of pain and relief. Once free, Barbara slumped against the tree, too weak to move. The woman, whose name she'd later learn was Samantha Richardson, immediately called 911, while her husband, John, rushed back to their car for water. Barbara sat trembling as Samantha knelt beside her again. "You're safe now. Can you hear me?" she asked, her voice soft. Tears streamed down Barbara's face, tears of pain, fear, and overwhelming gratitude. The rescue had come, but she felt a profound sense of having been broken. Police cruisers and an ambulance arrived within minutes. A paramedic gently helped Barbara, taking her vitals, asking her name. "Do you remember who you are, ma'am?" he asked, his voice calm and professional. Barbara shook her head, a fresh wave of tears escaping. Her body shivered uncontrollably from cold and shock. She couldn't speak, couldn't form the words. Soon she was on a gurney, being lifted into the ambulance, the world a confusing blur. The following day, Monica, Edward, and Brett returned to the woods, a knot of apprehension tightening in their stomachs. The spot where they'd left their mother was empty. A thick, eerie fog clung to the ground, lending a sinister, almost supernatural air to the scene. "Where is she?" Monica cried, her voice a ragged mix of desperation and simmering anger, her eyes darting frantically through the dense undergrowth. "She couldn't have just vanished!" "This is all your fault, Edward," Brett yelled, shoving his brother. "You insisted on this insane plan. You wouldn't listen." Edward, for once, looked shaken, his usual arrogant composure gone. I don't understand. She couldn't have gotten far." "Maybe she went home?" Monica shrieked, her voice cracking. "Are you serious? After what we did? You think she just strolled out of here and hailed a cab? We need to call the police." Edward shook his head vehemently. "No, we can't. If we tell them we left her here, we'll all go to jail. Do you understand that?" Brett grabbed Edward's arm, his eyes wide with panic. "So what do you suggest, huh? We just go home and pretend nothing happened?" "What other choice do we have?" Brett whispered, his gaze lost in the dark woods. Monica, tears streaming down her face, looked at her brothers. "We have to look for her, Edward. We can't just leave her out here." Edward nodded, though a sick feeling told him it was hopeless. They searched for a while, their calls echoing unanswered through the silent trees. "I don't know what to do," Monica finally whispered, defeated. "Let's just go home." They drove back in silence, the unspoken truth a heavy weight between them. Weeks turned into a month. For the Richardson family, John, Samantha, and their bright-eyed daughter, Victoria, visits to Mrs. B, as they'd affectionately nicknamed Barbara, became a cherished routine. Her amnesia was profound. She remembered nothing of her past, her family, or how she'd ended up in the woods. But the Richardsons, the family who had saved her, became her anchor in a sea of forgetting. They brought her home-cooked meals, fresh flowers, and most importantly, their unwavering kindness. Victoria would draw her pictures, regaling her with stories from school. Barbara, though her memory was a blank slate, felt a warmth and security with them she couldn't explain. Then, one crisp autumn morning, as golden sunlight streamed through her hospital window, something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic flash, but a slow, steady dawning. Images, names, faces began to surface from the depths of her mind. She remembered the company, her children, the betrayal. And she remembered the Richardsons. Her first call was to Hugh Hatfield. She had a new will to write. When the Richardson family arrived for their daily visit, punctual as ever, Barbara Bancroft was sitting up in her chair, a sheaf of documents resting on her lap. A newfound clarity shone in her eyes. "John, Samantha, Victoria," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "Come in, please." Samantha, who had started tidying the room, turned, a look of cautious pleasure on her face. "Mrs. B, you look different today. More like your old self, if you don't mind me saying." "I want you to know," Barbara continued, her gaze sweeping over their kind faces, "you didn't abandon me when I was at my lowest. I am eternally grateful." "Oh, Mrs. B, you don't owe us a thing," Samantha said quickly, approaching her. "We were just happy to help." "No, no," Barbara interrupted with a gentle smile. "It's more than that. You were my lifeline, and now I want to show my gratitude in a tangible way. I've decided to rewrite my will. Everything I have, I'm leaving it all to you." Samantha's hands dropped to her sides, her eyes widening in astonishment. She looked at John, who appeared equally stunned, though his composure was more steadfast. You're joking, right?" Samantha asked, her voice barely a whisper. "At my age, my dear, I rarely joke about such matters," Barbara chuckled, holding out the documents. "These papers, all legally signed and witnessed this morning, transfer my entire estate, Bancroft Industries, my homes, my investments, everything, to John, Samantha, and Victoria Richardson." Samantha took an involuntary step back, her expression shifting from shock to alarm. John finally spoke, his voice low and earnest. "Mrs. Bancroft, you absolutely don't have to do this. We never expected anything in return. We cared for you because it was the right thing to do." "But it wasn't just caring, John," Barbara insisted, her eyes filled with a deep, sincere appreciation. "You see, I remember now. I remember everything. I ended up in those woods because of my own children. They committed an unspeakable act, all for the sake of an inheritance they craved. I want everything I've worked for, everything I've built, to go to honest, decent people. And that, my dears, is you." She paused, her resolve clear. "I know this is unexpected, but my mind is made up. This is my final decision." Victoria, who had been standing quietly beside her parents, stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Barbara's neck. "Just promise you won't go back to the scary woods, Mrs. B," she whispered, her voice earnest and sweet. Barbara laughed, a genuine, light-hearted sound. "I promise, little one," she said, her eyes shining. "I most certainly will not." "But where will you live?" John asked, a practical concern breaking through his astonishment. Barbara's smile widened, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Oh, that old rascal Hugh Hatfield is finally getting his way. He's insisted I move in with him," she chuckled. "Took him long enough to wear me down, but I've finally agreed. We're going to be two old coots rattling around his big house together." "Hatfield?" Samantha couldn't hide her surprise. "You're going to live with Mr. Hatfield?" Barbara nodded, a look of serene happiness on her face. "Yes, we'll spend our golden years together. He's been a patient man. It's time." John and Samantha exchanged glances, a mixture of surprise and understanding in their eyes. It was clear that Barbara, despite everything, was still very much in command of her life and her decisions. "We're so happy for you, Mrs. B," Samantha said, her voice sincere. "Truly we are." Barbara smiled, taking John's hand. "Thank you, for everything, for not giving up on me. I'll be happy wherever I am, and you three will always be welcome visitors." The future, once a terrifying unknown, now seemed to hold a glimmer of peace and perhaps even joy. The grand Bancroft mansion once a symbol of Barbara's triumphs and later, her prison, felt different now. An unusual quietude permeated its opulent rooms, broken only by the soft tread of Hugh Hatfield's expensive loafers on the polished marble floors. Barbara felt a surprising sense of calm. Her posture was erect, her expression composed. The past weeks had seen her physical and mental recovery. Her memory was sharp, her legendary resolve fully restored. Today was the day of reckoning. She was determined that this house, her house, would finally be home to people of integrity. She paused at the grand living room door, her hand on the ornate brass handle, and exchanged a look with Hugh. His gaze was reassuring, a silent promise of support. "It's time," Barbara said, her voice firm and clear. "Time to reclaim what's mine and set things right." Hugh offered a small, encouraging smile, though a flicker of concern touched his eyes. He knew this confrontation would be brutal. They entered the living room. Barbara felt the familiar walls, which had seemed so alien during her children's brief, tyrannical reign, welcome her back. Her eyes fell on her favorite armchair, a silent witness to countless evenings. As she sank into its familiar embrace, the front door creaked open, followed by hesitant footsteps. "Mother?" Monica's voice, shrill with a forced anxiety, pierced the silence. "We've been looking everywhere for you. Where have you been? We were so worried. We thought something terrible had happened." Barbara raised her head, her gaze like chips of ice. "Worried?" she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm and contempt. "So you finally found me, did you? Well, here I am, alive and well, but you needn't have troubled yourselves. Your concern is no longer required." Monica rushed forward, her voice trembling. "Mother, you can't say that. We're your children. We were frantic. Why have you been ignoring us?" Barbara's lips curled into a humorless smirk. "Ignoring you? My dear Monica, if memory serves, you were the ones who left me tied to a tree in the middle of nowhere, to die." Monica recoiled as if struck, her face paling. Edward and Brett stood frozen by the doorway, their faces flushing with a mixture of anger and guilty apprehension. "You can't treat us like this," Brett blustered, his voice heavy with indignation. "We're your children. You have no right to kick us out. This is our home, too." Barbara rose slowly from her chair, advancing towards them, her eyes blazing with a righteous fire. "Home?" she scoffed. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Brett. There's no longer any place for vermin like you here. This house, this entire estate, will now belong to decent, honorable people. As for you three—" She paused for dramatic effect. "Your rightful place is in a prison cell." Monica gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "What are you saying? Are you insane? We're your family." "You forfeited that right," Barbara stated coldly. "For years I gave you everything. And in return, betrayal, cruelty, attempted murder. Now this house, and everything I own, belongs to the kind, compassionate family who saved my life. They showed me a care and concern I never received from any of you." Edward lunged forward, grabbing her arm, but Barbara, surprisingly strong, shook him off as if he were a bothersome insect. "Unhand me, Edward," she snapped, "or I swear all three of you will be behind bars before sunset." Monica and Edward stared at her, their faces a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. How had this happened? How had their once doting, if demanding mother transformed into this cold, avenging stranger? Hugh Hatfield stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Barbara's shoulder. "Monica, Edward, Brett," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is Mrs. Bancroft's decision. She has chosen her path and her rightful heirs." Monica stumbled back, her face ashen. "Get out," Barbara commanded, her voice like steel. "Now." Edward clenched his jaw, then turned on his heel and stalked towards the exit without a word. Brett, his face a mask of defeated rage, followed him. Monica lingered for a moment, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Goodbye, Mother," she choked out, the words laced with a bitterness that mirrored Barbara's own. "Maybe someday you'll realize we were still your children." Then she too turned and fled, not daring to look back. As the heavy oak door slammed shut behind them, sealing their fate, Barbara Bancroft began to calmly gather a few personal belongings. Her new life with Hugh awaited.